This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, Sudanese Canadians say Ottawa has to do more to bring their loved ones to safety as fighting rages in Khartoum.
We start to feel like abandoned by the international community, and we hope that our government will do something to help.
Also tonight, day 5 of the public sector workers' strike, and the union is preparing to dig in its heels.
I would expect to see our picket lines a little bit more active tomorrow, probably at some more strategic locations.
And one of Canada's premier wine regions grapples with the impact of climate change.
Some variety we lose probably 80%, 90%, some even 100%. It's too cold. That's too cold for any variety.
That's later, but first. We begin tonight in Sudan, where fighting continues between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. More than 400 people have died since the conflict broke out earlier this month, and thousands of foreign nationals, aid workers, and diplomats are stranded. Now, countries around the world, including Canada, are scrambling to get those people out. Katie Simpson reports from Washington.
Convoys with dozens of vehicles carefully make their way through the streets of Khartoum. The fighting is so intense in the Sudanese capital, diplomats from around the world have been given evacuation orders, fleeing the country in a series of high-risk rescue missions.
It was dangerous and precarious, but nevertheless we managed to use both C-130s and A-400 aircraft to go in, collect our diplomats and their residents, and fly out to safety.
British Defence Minister Ben Wallace says the UK worked with the Americans and the French to get diplomats and their families to designated meeting points before being airlifted out, while the US reportedly landed helicopters near the American embassy, deploying heavily armed soldiers to provide ground cover while their diplomats escaped. Democrat Senator Chris Coons says this means American operations in Sudan are on hold for now.
This is a temporary suspension. It's my hope and theirs that we will be able to return to Khartoum and the situation will stabilize.
Canada has suspended its operations in Sudan too. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly confirmed in a tweet Canadian diplomats are working safely in a third country. Her office did not respond to follow-up questions about how the Canadians fled. One senior government source says because this is still considered an active operation, few details are being released publicly.
Fighting is still ongoing, and it is very, very difficult for many Sudanese people because their situation is getting worse.
Conditions are deteriorating quickly, according to journalist Patrick Oyet, who is reporting from neighboring South Sudan. Fighting between the military and a powerful paramilitary force has left hundreds dead and thousands more wounded, according to the United Nations. But these early estimates are considered low, since the instability makes it difficult to get an accurate assessment of the violence. Civilians are also running out of food. Hospitals lack staff and medicine. Oyet says there are communication troubles as well.
We are hearing reports of internet outage in most parts of the country. That is now very much worrying because it means coordination between those inside Sudan and those outside will become more difficult.
There are no signs this conflict will ease anytime soon, which means the already brutal conditions for those still in the country are likely about to get worse. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
As you heard in Katie's story, Ottawa says Canadian diplomats will continue to help citizens from a temporary safe location outside Sudan. But Sudanese Canadians say people fleeing the conflict should get at least temporary visas to Canada on humanitarian grounds. Philip Lee Shannock has more on that.
Stop the war in Sudan now! Sudanese Canadians rally in Toronto calling for an end to the fighting in Khartoum.
It's not safe. They are scared for the kids, their lives.
Mayada Babakar says her sister fled the capital for the countryside where they have family.
They were stopped 4 times and they were very scared.
As the Sudanese army and a paramilitary group battle it out for control of the capital city, Mustafa Fado says many are being caught in the crossfire. He knows people who traveled there for the end of Ramadan.
They went back home to celebrate Eid with their family. They were supposed to be there for a week or two, but, this happened and, they were stuck.
Global Affairs Canada says about 1,600 Canadians have voluntarily registered, but there are likely many more. Canada has temporarily suspended diplomatic operations and relocated to safe locations outside of Sudan.
We start to feel like abandoned by the international community, and we hope that our government will do something to help.
Ashraf Ahmed is president of the Sudanese Canadian Community Association.
And we would like to hear from the government some programs, special programs for Sudanese Canadians to sponsor their families trapped over there.
Khalid Madani teaches political science in the African Studies program at McGill University in Montreal. He says Canada has granted humanitarian visas to people in conflict zones in the past, but first, people need to get out of harm's way.
I'm asking neighboring countries to keep their borders open, but also for the international community to understand the depth of the crisis may require many be given at least temporary asylum, even in countries like Canada.
And although embassy staff are no longer in Sudan, he says Canada can coordinate efforts to help through offices in Egypt, Chad, and Ethiopia.
Canadians can coordinate their consulates around Sudan in order to coordinate this kind of rescue attempt.
Madani, who has family fleeing Khartoum on their way north to Egypt, says Global Affairs is not giving enough direction. So many are unsure if they do make it to the border, if there will be any help. Global Affairs says it's in regular contact with Canadians in Sudan and will provide advice as the situation unfolds. Philip Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Canada's largest public service union is expected back on the picket lines tomorrow, stepping up tactics by demonstrating at ports. More than 150,000 workers walked off the job Wednesday. Both the government and the union are blaming each other for letting the strike drag on. Marina von Stackelberg tells us where the negotiations stand tonight.
To the public, we're trying to be as least impactful as we possibly can across the country. But again, members see that there's not a whole lot of movement on the employer side.
Chris Aylward, the national president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, is hinting that civil servants who have walked off the job may soon move their strike locations beyond the exterior of office buildings.
I would expect to see our picket lines a little bit more active tomorrow, probably at some more strategic locations. That's going to impact the government and not Canadians.
Aylward says the strike action will target the government's revenue streams, but wouldn't get into more detail. While both sides continue to negotiate during the strike, pressure from the union is mounting. Yesterday, Aylward accused Treasury Board President Mona Fortier of incompetence. She heads up the federal body that is negotiating with the union.
Well, first, I won't be distracted by kicking and screaming.
Fortier warns the union not to break any rules on the picket line.
It's the union's position. I'm, again, focusing on the fact that we will make sure that it is lawful. That is something that I just want to make sure that if they do have, other type of picket lines, it has to be lawful.
Fortier says the federal government is not drafting any legislation right now that would force employees back to work.
No, we are working at the table. That's the best way to be able to get to a deal, and that's what I'm concentrating on.
The union says it's willing to strike as long as needed. It has $43 million available to pay striking workers $75 a day. And Aylward says the union has $200 million extra to draw from other sources.
The strike pay is not an issue at all. And I want to make that very clear, that we have access to funds, that this strike can go on for an extremely long time. We're hoping it won't.
So I would say I'm doing a fair amount of talking and chanting and camaraderie, which is why hence my voice sounds like this.
Civil servant Carolyn Eves works with Immigration Canada. She says she's saved up money and is prepared to strike as long as needed.
Because I work really hard every single day, as do like all Canadians, but inflation, things are all going up in price.
Eves says the cost of everything from groceries to gas and housing has gone up, but her wage has not. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
An Indigenous man who spoke out about the police practice known as Starlight Tours has died. In January of 2000, Daryl Knight was driven outside of Saskatoon by two police officers and abandoned without winter clothes. He survived after a power plant worker heard him knocking on the door. The bodies of 2 other Indigenous men, Rodney Nastus and Lawrence Wegner, were found around the same time in the same area. When Knight shared his story, it led to a wave of protests, firings, and criminal charges. 2 officers were convicted in Knight's case. Investigations into the deaths of Nastus and Wegner were inconclusive. Daryl Knight died earlier this month. A Kenyan cabinet minister says his government may need to place regulations on places of worship. Kenyan authorities have exhumed dozens of bodies since Friday, believed to be victims of a Christian cult. Susanna De Silva reports.
As quickly as they dig, another body is discovered. Police tape marking off dozens of shallow graves in the coastal Kenyan village just north of Mombasa, all believed to be victims of a Christian cult. Nearby family members fear the worst.
All the people who have been coming here, I can see none of us have seen our relative.
Abbas Ade is searching for his wife, son, and in-laws. He says his wife left a letter and everything else at home. He then began a frantic search.
So when I get to search her phone, I see someone has told them they are going to see Jesus on date 8, and she went missing on date 7.
So far, police say almost 50 bodies have been found, including children, all believed to be followers of a pastor who told them to fast to death in order to meet Jesus. Pastor Paul Mackenzie was arrested in March in connection with the deaths of 2 children allegedly starved to death by their parents under his advice. Police were then tipped off to the possibility of graves on his property. 15 people were also rescued. 4 later died.
There are many who are still in there, who are continuing with this fast and possibly dying.
Hussein Khalid is the director of the human rights organization Haki Africa. He says those rescued still believe.
The moment she was brought here, she absolutely refused to, be administered with first aid, and she closed her mouth firmly, basically refusing to be assisted, wanting to continue with her fast until she dies. And this basically signifies the magnitude of this issue.
Hallelujah. YouTube videos show the pastor preaching to large crowds, even classrooms filled with children. Khalid fears there are many more followers out there who may be dying and says threats by police against survivors that they may face attempted suicide charges is not helping.
This basically meant that more out there who have seen this are afraid of coming out. So these are victims. These are not criminals. We need psychosocial counseling so that they can be, de-radicalized and understand what is happening.
Officials are visiting nearby villages as they fear the discovery of more bodies and even more deaths. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
A month-long manhunt has come to an end in India.
Amritpal Singh has been arrested by Punjab police at around 6:45 a.m. today morning in village Rode. He was absconding from last about more than 1 month.
Police in Punjab state announcing the arrest of Amritpal Singh in a Sikh temple this morning. Singh is a self-styled preacher and has tried to revive the Khalistan movement, which calls for an independent Sikh homeland. Indian authorities consider Singh and his followers to be threats to national security. In mid-March, he evaded arrest in a dramatic car chase. Singh's parents told Indian media he turned himself in to police. NDTV reports he may have surrendered over fears police would target his wife, who is a British national living in India on a temporary visa. And one of India's most prestigious arts academies is going through a Me Too moment. It's facing criticism for not taking timely action on sexual harassment complaints against an instructor. The accused teacher was arrested this month after intense student protests on campus. Anupama Chandrasekharan reports from Chennai.
The sound of Bharatanatyam dancers echoes through the lush campus of Kalakshetra, one of India's most celebrated arts institutions. But on March 30th, people passing by the dance school heard a different sound. More than 200 students turned out to protest the school's inaction on complaints against faculty members.
Of course, this is unprecedented, right?
Ritya Pillai comes from a family of dancers. She witnessed the students protesting and says it was like nothing she's ever seen before.
This kind of protests have never happened in Kalakshetra. Because, if you speak against powerful people, then you may not ever get opportunities. You will be blacklisted. So
The saga started last December when allegations against an influential teacher were posted online. By March, he was cleared by an internal committee and the allegations were labelled as untrue. And a gag order was put in place forbidding students and staff from discussing the case. Then several more students came forward with their own stories accusing the same teacher and 3 others of sexual harassment, body shaming, and verbal abuse. Some of the allegations date back years.
Measures were taken against the complaints which students gave.
A senior dance student speaking on condition of anonymity says the school ignored their complaints.
So it was an immediate action taken, like, okay, we'll go on a protest, ask our management the question.
Within days of the protest, one of the accused teachers, Hari Padman, was arrested and charged with sexual harassment and criminal intimidation. The other 3 teachers were dismissed by Kalakshetra.
The protest was really almost the ultimate breaking point. The administration have continuously tried to exonerate the perpetrators.
Dancer Swarnamalya Ganesh is vocal about sexual harassment in the South Indian art circles. She says she's not surprised by what's happening at Kalakshetra.
The culture of denial and intimidation has been a long-standing one, I think one that is deeply embedded in patriarchy.
Government data shows that fewer than half of Indian women who face physical or sexual violence report it. For now, a Women's Commission has recommended legal action, police surveillance, and establishment of redressal committees. Some students have filed a legal petition demanding better safety policies at the school. Ganesh believes more needs to be done.
So this is just an abuse of power, and this unchecked power, this absolute power where you can do no wrong, that is a huge problem. And we have to put some checks and balances.
For CBC News, I'm Anupama Chandrasekaran in Chennai.
Former Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo has returned to Peru to face corruption charges. He turned himself in to be extradited from the U.S. on Friday. Toledo had been living there since 2017 after a judge in Peru ordered his arrest. He's been accused of accepting $35 million in bribes from a Brazilian construction company in exchange for a contract to build a major highway. Toledo denies the allegations. If convicted, he would become the 3rd Peruvian president to be imprisoned. Extreme weather is leading to unwanted changes in BC's wine industry. A cold snap last December caused widespread damage to vineyards in the Okanagan Valley. Industry experts say that means grape production could be cut in half this year. Bad news for producers and also for the region's tourism industry. The CBC's Brady Strachan has more.
So we can cut this, but that's how we check the damage.
South Okanagan grape grower Balwinder Dhaliwal doesn't like what he's seeing in his vineyards this spring. With a small knife, he carefully dissects one of the small buds along the grapevine to look for winter kill.
You can go a little bit more deeper. They're brown and black. So that means that this is done.
An extreme cold spell over 2 days last December is what's caused all the damage. Dhaliwal says he's seeing significant signs of winter kill across his 600 acres of wine grapes.
Some variety we lose probably 80%, 90%, some even 100%. It's too cold. That's too cold for any variety.
The damage is especially bad in some of the more popular red wine varieties like Merlot and Cabernet Franc that are less winter hardy.
Some variety we doesn't even have probably any crop. Seriously, some variety of the reds, maybe we doesn't see any 2023 vintage. No wine from 2023. That's bad.
Crop loss is projected right across the Okanagan Valley, where the vast majority of BC's wine grapes are grown. Miles Prodan is the CEO of Wine Growers BC. He says initial projections are for a significant reduction in grape production right across the region.
That's going to mean there's 50% less grapes to go towards making wine. And so if you think about half the crop lost, that is significant.
Prodan says this winter damage is the latest in a string of extreme weather events to hit the BC wine industry. Everything from excessive heat and wildfire smoke to flooding and extreme cold.
Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've slowly seen a decrease up to 30% in what we should be getting off of what we know is planted. So we attribute it to climate change.
The crop damage is being felt right across the industry. For winemakers like David Patterson in Kelowna, fewer grapes this year means fewer bottles of wine to sell.
We're beholden to Mother Nature. We can't change what has happened.
The BC wine industry injects $3 billion to the economy. And for a region like the Okanagan that's so dependent on tourism, Patterson is worried about a ripple effect if there's less wine to go around.
Tasting rooms not being able to open because they just don't have the wine. It's going to be a negative effect on tourism.
Back in Oliver, Balwinder Dhaliwal is cutting his losses, literally chopping down this block of Roussanne vines that were significantly damaged.
This variety is toast, it's done. And then we just cut it off and we can put in the new variety.
He says responding to the changing climate is the only way forward. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Oliver, British Columbia.
For more than a decade, Italy has welcomed tens of thousands of Ukrainian immigrants, most of them women working as caretakers. Irina Tselep was one of them. Years ago, she worked as a babysitter to a Canadian-Italian family in Rome. After Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Irina returned to Rome, this time as a refugee. Now she and her two daughters are living with the same family that once employed her. Megan Williams tells us more from Rome.
13-year-old Eva Giulia plays the piano in the open living room of her family's apartment in Rome. Beside her sits 6-year-old Veronica, and nearby on the floor, 2-year-old Sofia.
I play piano because I study piano at school. Veronica has expressed interest, so I tried to teach her a few notes and scales and stuff. And then Sofia likes to hear piano as well.
Veronica and Sofia are the daughters of Irina Tselep, former babysitter to Eva and her 10-year-old sister Clara. They fled their home in Ternopil, Ukraine, after Russian missiles landed nearby. Welcomed in Rome by Eva and Clara's parents, Canadian Charlotta Joll and her Italian husband Simone Cadeddu.
Expecting to go back to work this year, actually, yeah.
The former Vancouverite has been a lawyer for a UN agency here in Rome, off and on for almost 2 decades. But she says experiencing the impact of the Russian invasion on Irina and the girls has changed her priorities. When Charlotta does return to work, she wants to shift her career to supporting refugee women.
So many of these Ukrainian refugees are moms, they're on their own with their children here, small children, and I just know how that is. I know how much help you need. Like, we talk about women getting back into the workforce after COVID and whatever, and I think we need to make sure we have these support networks somehow or other.
Hanno imparato tante cose, non solo la lingua, ma...
Former babysitter Irina says she and her girls miss her husband, a Greek Catholic priest who's stationed in eastern Ukraine, where he helps older people. But she says she feels lucky to be able to stay here when so many other Ukrainian women are returning home due to lack of support in their new countries. Here, she says, her daughters are loved and cared for by the older girls, learning Italian and some English and how to get along with others.
Anche in un modo stretto, perché siamo insieme.
Charlotta and Simone insist their family feels just as fortunate.
Yeah, it was unexpected, and it's a tragedy for them, of course, but for us it was a godsend in some ways.
Teaching his own daughters about the world beyond their lives in Rome and how opening up your home can enrich everybody's lives.
We can tell ourselves that in our very little and finite way we're doing something, and that's, I think it's very rewarding, if you will.
Megan Williams, CBC News, Rome.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Starting Mondays, you can download a special curated edition of the program featuring our favorite stories from the weekend. Well, it may feel like spring has only just sprung, but in Alberta, preparations are already underway for wildfire season. From Slave Lake to Fort McMurray, the province has been home to some of Canada's most devastating forest fires in recent years. CBC's Erin Collins hit the road to see what's being done to limit the damage caused by the next major fire.
There's still snow on the peaks of Protection Mountain, but for Parks Canada staff here, forest fire season has already begun. And Charlie McClellan walks through a line of freshly cut trees at the base of the mountain, this spot just northwest of Banff, a last line of defense carved into the forest.
Cut down a lot of trees here.
Why?
Create a fuel break in the forest so that if we get a fire in this location, we'll have management options to contain it.
The goal, protect the nearby towns by managing the forest that surrounds them. Today, a growing concern here in Alberta and across Western Canada.
The climate's been changing, so our fire seasons are getting hotter and drier and longer, and we're seeing larger, more vigorous wildfires.
Edson Forestry, this is Alpha Victor X-Ray. I would just like to...
Hundreds of kilometers away in Hinton, things are heating up for wildfire season as well. This fire isn't real, part of a simulation being run at Canada's only bricks-and-mortar wildfire training facility, training hundreds of firefighters and support staff every year.
Not a whole lot for close pumpable water.
Shane Burkholder sits inside the helicopter simulator, the firefighting veteran entering his 5th season, now learning to train others.
There's a lot of calm before and after, and then a lot of adrenaline during. And you got to be able to switch it on, switch it off.
We're opening the door. At a nearby airfield, Burkholder watches as firefighters practice exiting a chopper while it's still in the air.
More often than not, if you're landing on a wildfire, it's some sort of hover exit.
These are HAC, or helicopter attack crews, generally first on the scene, approaching a forest fire from the air, assessing the danger, coming up with a plan to mitigate it, hoping to keep wildfires in the wilderness and away from towns and cities. That's the hope inside those communities too, places like Jasper, where the risk of wildfires is impossible to ignore, according to firefighter Kelly Dawson.
So you can see that the houses are really pretty well touching the trees. So that's our wildland-urban interface, what we're working on, making sure that those embers from the trees or that fire can reduce intensity before it touches the town site and the houses.
Well, forecasters say this could be a mild fire season in Alberta. Of course, that can change as quickly as the weather in the mountains. Erin Collins, CBC News, Jasper.
The family of Michael Schumacher is threatening legal action against a German magazine after it published a fake interview with the Formula One legend. Die Aktuelle ran a cover story with the headline, "Michael Schumacher, the first interview." It was revealed at the end of the article that the quotes were generated using AI. Schumacher has not been seen in public since suffering a brain injury in a skiing accident in 2013. In a statement on Friday, the magazine's publisher apologized to Schumacher's family and said it has fired the editor-in-chief.
Ladies, move. Gentlemen, move. Somebody ring the alarm. A fire on the roof. Ring the alarm. And I'm throwing elbows. Ring the alarm. And I'm throwing elbows.
Pretty much the scene in the UK today, with cell phones ringing the alarm in a nationwide test of the emergency alert system. The result? Not exactly according to plan. The alert is meant to warn people about danger zone situations like fires, flooding, or attacks. Millions of Brits did get the 10-second alarm and text message, but some said it went off earlier or later than expected. The Welsh message contained a word that means nothing except for a ski resort in Slovenia. Many didn't get the alert at all, including users of the 3 mobile network, which is now investigating what went wrong. Some didn't even know it was coming, like Love Island star Will Young, whose reaction was captured by girlfriend Jessie and posted on TikTok.
What's that? What does that mean? There's a life-threatening emergency nearby. Why are you laughing at that? Someone could be dying. No, it's Practice, William. Is it? Yes, did you not read the news?
Another reason to pay attention to the news.
She called out a warning. Don't ever let life pass you by.
The UK system is modelled partly on other countries, including Canada. And of course, ours hasn't always been smooth either. When the first tests here were done in 2018, only 35% of cell phones received them. We now test the Alert Ready system twice a year, usually in May and November.
Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey.
So as countries around the world figure out the best way to keep citizens safe in emergencies, know that you'd also be able to hear an alert here on the radio too. In the meantime, we'll leave you with yet another alarm-themed tune, Tenor Saw's 1985 hit Ring the Alarm on The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.
Hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Whoa, hey. Tato, we beat them all in a row. Donkey want water, but you hold him Joe. Tato, we beat them all in a row. The cost want water, but hold him Joe. Ring the alarm.